Hello everybody, my name's Ian and I'm doing another illustration discussion video, this time focusing on my idea of composition, on how I make my own decisions regarding composing an illustration, whether it's a pencil illustration, an ink piece, or one of my digital pieces. In this case, this will be one of the Portage and Main illustrations I've done. I've already gotten one posted up here on the YouTube channel, and I don't want to go over the entire process of painting that in this video, really just the initial breakdown, how I end up putting the robot character into that design. Um, so a little bit of backstory on this one. Corner of Portage and Main here in Winnipeg was only recently, as of early September 2025, was only recently opened to pedestrian traffic after many decades of being closed off. And shortly after it was opened, I took a series of photos crossing all portions of that intersection with the intent of doing a series of robot illustrations in this particular setting. With this particular photograph here, I had a rough idea already in mind of the pose I would want to have the robot in. And I've done a few, no, I've already done a few of these illustrations using my pre-existing photos of models that I've worked with in the past. Some of the photos that I had taken of Portage and Main, I had a rough idea of photos I had of models that would line up really well with that. Sometimes it was just a matter of finding ones that lined up well with the background photo that I had taken. But I had also basically had the idea that I would do a photo shoot with one particular model based on these background photos I had taken, with, again, a rough idea in mind of what this could look like. So yesterday, I did a Photoshop with my friend Erica. This is the two of us here, where she's holding my camera, where we went through a series of the photos I had, and I had already sketched out a rough rough figure placement, but figuring out the body language and such. But I really like, when possible, working with a model as well. All the decisions I was making regarding composition, this is being added to by working with a model. Her particular body language and her particular physique would go a long way to inform what I'd end up doing in the final illustration. I still needed my initial idea. I still needed to figure out, was she going to be seated? Was she going to be standing, walking, running? Was she going to be was the character was going to have wings? So I had to have enough space in the background photo for there to be wings going up higher. And if there are wings, then the model has to know that, so that she can adjust her body language to compensate for that extra weight on her back, things like that. But with the particular photo I'm going to be playing with here, the initial composition was going to be a seated robot with one leg extended out towards the viewer, on an angle, but that's the rough idea. I now have my photo reference set up, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started on sketching it out. So this time I'm using Photoshop, and I'm doing all the painting and all the illustrations on my Huion Kamvas Pro 2.5K resolution, 16, it's a 16-inch screen tablet hooked up to my PC. I'm going to go ahead and get started sketching out the idea. I use a variety of methods for sketching. Generally, I deal with, you lay out the placement of the head, and then figure out the scale of the rest of the figure based on the number of heads high it is. It's a pretty common scale. I probably first saw that in the book How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, where you would change the height of different types of characters depending on the number of heads high that they were. Even though I'm working with photo references for both the background and for the figure, I'm still laying out the basic instructions the same way. I am not restricting myself to just the model, to just the photo of the model, I also want to have the freedom to be able to adjust things a little bit. The one issue with working with models, with any sort of static reference like that, is if you take a photo of somebody pretending to run and you draw it exactly as the person is exactly matching the body language of your model, your drawing will look like a person pretending to run. You won't actually have a sense of movement. And I want to get away from that in these illustrations. Generally, the photo I'm using is where I start to give me a rough idea of where everything is in space, but then I'm going to tweak things. In fact, right here, I want to have the character looking at a phone, looking at some sort of phone display in her hand, to give her just a little bit more, um, give her a bit of business, give her a bit of, yeah, she's actually doing something with her hand rather than just a simple, this is a character posing. So as much as I really like working with models, and I'm really, really happy that I have the opportunity to work with so many fantastic models, I do tend to use that. I do tend to move beyond just that and try to incorporate cues within the rest of the illustration that I want as well. Have her do something that shows that, well, in this case, that she is interacting with the environment, so that she doesn't just look like a photo or a cardboard cutout of a robot dropped in front of the corner of Portage and Main, but I want there to be some sort of additional stuff going on. Now, I'm doing a very rough pass on the basic composition, just making sure I've got everything figured out as to where all these elements are in space. As much as I'm wanting this to be about the corner of Portage and Main, I'm also giving myself some latitude. I'm giving myself a bit of artistic freedom to move things around a little bit. You'll get a sense of where everything is, but it might not be completely accurate to their placement in the real world. A little bit of artistic licenses is generally called for. One really good reason for doing that, for not making it completely accurate to life, why I'm not having the character completely accurate to life and the setting, is I want to add a little bit of the sense of movement into the piece. That as much as she's a robot, she's not an unliving, unmoving thing. She is inhabiting her environment. She is part of it, and she's interacting with it. The environment is affecting her, so she had just, in the case of this particular composition, she will have just pulled out her phone. The cars going by, I want them to look more, at least get a sense of them, that they're going by, that they're not just stopped at a red light. I don't know that I necessarily want to put in speed lines or any sort of blurring effect. That would be a very easy way to make everything move. But if I vary the composition a little bit from, to be just a little bit different from the original photographs, or at least I allow myself to do that, and get a better sense of things moving in space, that there's a bit more of a dynamic quality to everything here. Just sketching out the background buildings. There's this one decent sized building directly behind her, but over here, this larger structure on the right, this will actually be the Richardson building. Very well known, a very prominent structure at the corner of Portage and Main. Now, does changing scales, does changing the placement of buildings automatically add movement? No. No, it doesn't. But the fact that I'm letting myself tinker with reality a little bit will give me more of an opportunity to add a bit more life, to make sure that it looks like a living drawing, a living illustration, rather than just a couple of photographs stuck together. Now, I've said many times that for me, and again, this is all from my point of view. These are all techniques that work for me and have worked for me over the years. Um, I'm not wanting to tell people specifically how to draw. This is how and why I make the decisions I do. You don't need to make the same decisions as me, but you should make decisions. You should be thinking about um, the drawings that you're doing, the illustrations that you're doing, because that will um, give everything a little bit more of a sense of reality. There's a reason why you made the choices you did. Probably the best way to break the rules is to know what they were to begin with. So then you're making a conscious choice. Then you are deciding. Even if you don't ever explain it to anybody, things will just have a bit more sense of realism. They may not reflect the real world, but they will reflect a reality, a consistent reality, if that's what you're going for. All right, so I'm laying out the last parts of the basic composition, just all the buildings behind her. Almost going for a rough scribble art. Um, and actually, that's another valid method that a lot of people use, specifically in figure composition and figure design. Um, the most common is figuring out how big characters are, how tall characters are, based on the number of heads high they are, starting with the head as a unit of measurement. But another one is you just scribble in the rough shape and then you keep with very light lines until you decide which lines there are the ones that you like the most. And then you start darkening those because you're discovering the illustration as you're working. I tend to use a combination of the two. All of my illustrations, at least the initial layout, I tend to think of all my drawings as something I do at least twice. If I'm working on paper, I either do the initial breakdown on my tablet or I'll do it in a sketchbook, potentially even doing it very lightly on the final piece, but in general, I prefer to do that that initial illustration on a separate medium, because then I can compare. In this case, I'm doing this quick and dirty version of the illustration on one particular channel. Now in Photoshop, you have channels and layers. A lot of other painting programs, they just have layers, in which case you can use it as a freestanding layer, basically a layer that will not appear in the final version of the illustration that you just use as a guide. But that's all I'm doing here. This particular illustration is on one channel, and I'm now going to do another version of this, drawing it over top on a different channel. Now when I draw it again, I can see some things that I already want to tweak from the original, where I'd put a phone in her hand. Originally I had her looking down. I want to have her look a little bit more across at that phone. So bring up her head a bit. But this is how I develop the composition. For this particular piece, I started with the main figure. I started with the focus of the illustration, even though the setting for this is part of this whole corner of Portage and Main thing. The focus is always going to be the character that's crossing the street, that's at the intersection, and then work out from there. So in this case, from front to back means from the character back into the background, into the setting, into the actual corner of Portage and Main. This is also part of my notion of the main character being the most important element in the illustration. Because I want to start with the most important to know that I've got the idea for that element nailed down, that I have that character ready to go. One major thing about working with two separate references, the photograph I took of Portage and Main and the photograph I took of this model of Erica here, is that while I did take the photo of the setting first, and I did have that photo on hand when we were doing the photo shoot. So it'd be very easy to be able to integrate her pose into that setting. I didn't adjust the lighting on her to match that. So I have to make sure that when I actually paint this, I have the lighting on the character, on this robot character, match the lighting of the environment. I'm not going to change the lighting in the environment. I like the idea of it being the middle of the day. Now, I also like working with a lot of reflective surfaces. That's honestly the biggest reason why I like drawing robot characters. Um, but being the time of year, being the fact that there was no rainfall when I took the reference photos, there really isn't much in the way of any sort of reflective surfaces aside from cars and some of the buildings um, in these settings. Now, I am going to play with that with some of them. I do have an idea for at least one upcoming illustration as part of this whole Portage and Main thing, where it will have just rained. So there will be pools of water acting as reflective surfaces for a very particular effect. Now, I talked about every drawing I do, I basically draw at least twice. This one I'm going to be doing a third time because this is still a pretty rough. I'm refining all of the figure placements. I'm refining where everything is in space. But I still want to do at least one more pass on the robot figure herself to put in the particular robot pattern on her. I want to make sure I'm not missing things like the various streetlights. This is a functioning corner, and I want to make sure that the placement of all of these lights indicating its controlled intersection are more or less correct. What I'm about to work on right now is another one of those instances where I'm going to bend reality to make it make more sense. This pole that's going all the way down here, there is another short post directly in front of it, like the one she's leaning against here. If I put it directly in front of there, it'll look like it's just part of that same pole. So instead, I'm going to move it to one side. Now, it'll make more sense when it's being painted, but that way I can continue this post behind it. I'll thicken up the lines on either side of the post to make it more obvious. But the same way that I've got this shorter post here, there's a series of these posts. I'll thicken up the exterior line. So this is a case where bending reality makes it actually look a little bit more real. I'm creating one more channel, and this one is really focusing on the character, putting in the robot plating pattern. I have a very particular design aesthetic for the robots that I do. When I'm doing my, not even sure how you would define it, regular robot figures, they have a very, it's not universal. I do tweak it from design to design, from figure to figure, from model that I'm working with, from to different model that I'm working with. But there are overall similarities in the design pattern, in the placement of plates that are intersecting with each other. So that's the stage I'm working on right now, starting with the initial major human features and then breaking it up into the metal plate pattern. The hair patterns I do on these robot pieces are very much based on the reference models, or the models that I'm working with, of the particular hairstyle that that model has. This line art will not appear in the final version, but it will define how the final version will be painted. I use the same rules, the same basic idea when it's a single figure, multiple figures, a panel of a comic book. Like the comic book I'm working on at the moment, all the panels in that are set up the same way. To an extent, the entire page on any of these comic projects is set up exactly the same way. Because not only is any given comic book panel an individual illustration, the page itself is an illustration and should be treated as a single work that needs to be composed. The way that each panel flows into the next one is itself a decision that should be made that aids the storytelling. Anything that can help draw the eye across a page from the upper left-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner. Try not to do clumsy things like used to be done in the past, where if the composition wasn't working, the artist would put arrows indicating what the next panel was that you were supposed to read. That can be charming, but it definitely interrupts the flow and frankly kind of lose immersion in reading a book if that's happening. So it's more accurate to say you want to draw the viewer's eye without making it look like you're drawing the viewer's eye. You in this particular image, I'm wanting to draw the viewer's attention to the main figure without having arrows pointing at the main figure. In this case, one of the things that you're looking at is the figure is looking at an object. There is this relationship between her face and the phone in her hand. So there's already a story being told. You don't know what it is. It's not up to me to tell you what that story is. I need the viewer to figure that part out. But that's one aspect of storytelling, a very small one. But nevertheless, that sets up the start of a story, the start of some sort of visual interest for the viewer by the way that I'm looking at things. Again, these are all the methods that I use to approach the construction of an illustration to help draw the attention of the viewer and maintain it. There are some artists who don't spend much time at all developing the backgrounds because for them the easiest way, or the way that works best for them, to have all the focus be on the central character is to not include much visual information about the setting. Certainly that can be a valid approach depending on the type of illustrating you're doing. If you're concentrating mostly on creating stickers for conventions or different events, backgrounds would make things overly complicated. It would actually clutter the illustration. I've done things like that, certainly. There are certain projects I've worked on where all you want to work on is just the character. And those can be a lot of fun. In general, though, I prefer doing much more elaborate settings, much more elaborate backgrounds, because I want that to help tell the story of who the character is. Or if it's at odds with the character, then it builds that tension. Why is this character in an environment that they clearly are not supposed to be in? And so that's why I make the particular decisions that I do. Now, a lot of it for me is unconscious. I don't necessarily set out to create, this is the story I want to create. I don't necessarily go into it that way. There certainly can be times where I do that. A lot of it comes from spending a lot of time developing visual storytelling, working in comics, trying to get a story across. So it's more that that's just where I've wound up. Or the vast majority of my illustrations have at least some storytelling element to them, because that's just kind of where I live. That's where all of my illustrations start from. And it's frankly the kind of thing I'm the most interested in seeing. I'm much more interested in seeing something where it looks like there is something happening. It's not just a picture of a character. When Marvel Comics was putting together the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and it was just this series of entries detailing characters' backgrounds and powers and such, there was always almost always an original illustration done for them, and comic artist John Byrne, who did a lot of those, would describe those illustrations as characters waiting for a bus, because it was meant just to show the character, but not necessarily show what the character was about and what they were doing. When possible, I do not do character illustrations where they are standing waiting for a bus. When possible. There have been times when I used to do work for clients, you would have to be doing just a static image of a character just to get the concept, the character design, the costume design or whatever down. In general, I did not find that type of illustration work terribly fulfilling. So the design on the main character, which is the most important thing, is pretty much done. What I would like to do is erase all the line art that I created on the other channels that's sitting behind that. I'm just going to quickly use the lasso tool to make a basic selection on the character. I want to remove all those sketchy lines that are under this. I'm going to leave all the other sketchy lines for the setting, but I want her final design to be more or less what I go with in the final painting. So I want to have that part be cleaned up. Everything else, though, I can keep the sketchy lines. So now that I clean up all the line art behind the main character, we now have the rest of the design being fairly sketchy, but there's enough there for me to work with. We've now completed the basic design and layout, the basic composition for this Portage and Main robot illustration. My next step will be to go on to lay down flat layers and then to do the final painting. So I'm going to do the final painting in another video, but I think we're pretty much wrapped up with this one. So thank you very much for hanging out to watch me work on this. Hopefully you'll stick around for the next video to see how this particular painting progresses. Have yourselves a great day. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video.